handle. I don't get why people. Okay. Okay. Anyways.
Right. Yeah. I think that kind of interesting to think about. Kind of I mean it's basically when you're dealing with tabletop, like you generally have kind of agreed upon conventions because you basically say, oh, we're going to use this system, we're going to play D&D 5th edition. Just by saying that, like I've defined a whole lot of stuff about what the campaign is going to be like. Well, it's going to be a fantasy game, probably, obviously.
What your classes are able to do.
Right, exactly. Whereas in MMO combat, like you have kind of the general guideline of the lore and what the classes do and whatnot. But looking at Final Fantasy 14 as a game, like they sometimes give very kind of cinematic abilities to the characters, even though the world is kind of like not very cinematic in itself. I'm thinking like the Paladin Passage of Arms, which is their like level 70 ability. That's this like giant, very showy. It's basically like you create a cone behind you where the players will basically take less damage, but it's like just particle effect extravaganza. And it doesn't like really fit with very much. When you start looking at the low level abilities where it's sword swings, and I think the most flashy ability is literally flash, which basically just is as an aggro generator, an AOE aggro generator. But then you get up to the high level and suddenly it's like, oh, I have this ability that like where I can protect everybody behind me and reduce their damage by, I think it's 30%. Which doesn't necessarily fit very much with the setting, really, from a roleplay point of view.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's difficult. It's really hard sometimes to write like a character in 14 in particular, because 14 like lore wise is very inconsistent.
Right.
So like if you want to write yourself as being a paladin, for example, like there's 3 different ways that you can write your paladin story. But all the abilities that you use as the paladin class are supposed to be like these very ancient and unknown spells. So you kind of have to write yourself as like a low magic character for it to abide to every lore rule, which is really hard to do.
Right.
So that is a real challenge. So the challenge for that is power levels of power, which are basically the scale in which you write your characters to what they're capable of. Like I don't know, what's a good Dragon Ball Z is an extremely high level of power character writing.
Right.
Where these characters are basically gods.
Right. Over 9,000 even.
Oh my god. Hey, I heard that's a thing that the kids say on the internet.
It's one of these memes.
Some of these memes. Yeah, we're hip and cool and know what we're talking about.
Something like that. We can pretend. But yeah.
I'm role playing.
Exactly, we can role play that. We're cool. Yeah, and so and like you can kind of do different levels of power within a tabletop game, but a lot of it's kind of like what's agreed upon. Because I mean, like kind of some of the worst experiences in tabletop I've had is where like where like like some people like played like essentially super powered characters, and other people basically had to were playing much less powerful characters. Explicitly, it was D&D, and like some people got to roll the characters much more obviously much more generously. Whereas the rest of us had a much worse dice rolling system, and our characters were kind of instantly less powerful, and so like some people could be very cinematic, whereas other people could be the rest of us would die and become
Ghosts.
lose clerical powers. No, this one really kind of terrible GM, like I was playing a cleric and I died. He's like, oh, but you did something good, so I'll turn you into a fighter of the equivalent level. I'm like, my character stats are I put my good stat in wisdom, which is not very useful for a fighter.
Oh my goodness.
Right, it was a pretty terrible campaign. Anyway, but yeah, it's so and there are kind of systems that try to kind of bridge the gaps between different kind of power levels. There was one system called Torg that would they had kind of different levels of power available, and so like they had a logarithmic system, so that you could roll on the same scale for a dagger, a dagger wound, as well as a space station, main cannon, planet destroying bolt. In theory, you could basically roll on the same system, given the logarithmic scale of it. And so, but like in general, people kind of like said, okay, within a kind of a typical campaign, like, okay, we're gonna play very heroic this time, or like I said, like like my group tended to be very heroic, but that one time, somebody wanted to play kind of a very gritty, a very gritty type campaign, very simulationist, and so like I think you really don't get kind of that same ability. You don't get that same ability in an MMO, but I guess like you probably get it like within communities.
Yeah, like one